Fundamentally, there are four major components for a digital ecosystem. And I think apps stay at the core of it. Four components for this digital ecosystem being user profile or users of internet, the digital service industry per se, the innovative startups, and the NEGP, which is the National E-Governance Program.
Welcome friends to the Growth Genius, powered by Infidigit. My name is Kaushal Thakkar. I am the founder of Infidigit and your host for the show. Each week, I interview geniuses who have created phenomenal digital growth. We witness key techniques and share insights to help you learn and create your own growth story. Today, we are going to discuss the topic app ecosystem in India and ingredients for app success. To share these insights, we have Sanjay Trisal, the country head of AppsFlyer. AppsFlyer, the mobile attribution tool, is a market leader with more than 70% market share. Being the country head, Sanjay has witnessed the growth of the ecosystem in India very closely during the last many years. Let's learn more about apps from this Growth Genius. Hi Sanjay, thank you so much for being on the Growth Genius show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Kaushal. How are you doing?
Hey, doing wonderful. Thanks a lot for being a part of the Growth Genius. And you are in Bangalore. How is the weather out there today?
And if there's anything that you can envy about Bangalore, it's weather. It's been amazing. I think we have very, very pleasant weather right now. Unfortunately, cannot go out too much, but something to kind of cheer for.
Great. That's really nice. And yeah, the days are very near now when we should be pushing this COVID thing behind and we should be all out back to our normal lives.
I hope so. I just hope so. Yeah.
Sanjay, for some of our audience who are not aware about you, could you help them with a short introduction about yourself?
Well, surely. Thank you, Kaushal. My name is Sanjay. As you know, I am the country manager for AppsFlyer, and I was the first employee for AppsFlyer, joined AppsFlyer in 2015. Since then, been responsible for shaping up various teams across customer success, sales, tech support, marketing, and so on. Prior to AppsFlyer, I was with InMobi for about 2.5, 3 years, responsible for building up the Latin America business from scratch. That's been my stint in the digital ecosystem. I spent good amount of years initially with blue chip companies like Dell, Ingram Micro, and so on and so forth. So spent about 13 years there before the startup bug bit me and I entered InMobi.
And Sanjay, would like to know more. AppsFlyer recently completed 5 years, and tell us more about AppsFlyer as well, please.
AppsFlyer is a mobile measurement platform, a marketing analytics platform, which is a global leader, headquartered out of US and Israel. Our product and tech is based out of Israel. The basic premise of the product is providing customers great tool to make sure that they can do their ROI analysis, can measure their campaigns that they are running, and do deep analysis onto their campaigns and measure the LTV of the customer right from pre-install up to the uninstall level. So that's what AppsFlyer does.
Nice. And quite a few of my customers are also using AppsFlyer. And I was reading somewhere and I heard that you have almost a major share of the market. Any numbers which you could share with us in terms of the market share which AppsFlyer enjoys?
Yeah, thank you, Kaushal. Thanks for that question. I think I missed out saying it before. So AppsFlyer is a global leader. We have upwards of 60 to 70% market share globally, but India's story is still better and on rise. We started AppsFlyer India as a business in September 2015. I was the first one to come on board and thereafter responsible for, setting up teams across customer success, sales, marketing, tech support, and so on. Our initial interaction with our customers was, pre 2015 was basically from our headquarters doing business remotely in India. And that's when we thought, looking at the potential that India offers, it was the right time to make sure that we do investments in India and work in the customer environment right now, based in India, setting up offices in India. So that's how I started. I, in fact, remember a funny incident when I joined AppsFlyer and my CEO said that, hey, you know what, we have you on board. Now, can we make our market share 50%? I said, well, that's interesting. But can you tell me what's the market share now? So we don't care. That's the expectation we have. So that sounded to be a very, very, very high. I don't know whether he was serious or not, though, but it sounded as a very high number to kind of achieve for. And unlike what most of the sales gurus, some of my mentors at that point in time suggested that, we need to have a lot of salespeople on ground and so on and so forth. I instead focused on making sure the customers that we have in place, like whatever limited customers back then in 2015 we had, We wanted to make sure that they get this AppsFlyer experience that we are known for globally, making sure that we serve and cater them on time every time. And that's been my mantra always:
Mm-hmm.
cater
Really good.
and service on time every time, and making sure that you solve for their problems as and when they occur. And that's what we believed in. And I went in investing in customer success before we hired anybody in the sales front. In fact, my first sales hire was in 2017, which is 2 years later, once the company was formed in India.
You are all hands on in terms of sale in that case, heading the country and also taking up that huge responsibility of increasing the.
In fact, what we did well was making sure to understand our customer pain points. And as I said, catering to customer needs on time, every time. So that helped us winning customers, that helped us winning confidence in customers' heart. And when those customers moved to other places, because they had such a great experience, they took us along everywhere, right? So that's the beauty of relationship that you make. So
Beauty of the
it has
product as
has
well.
been a great working experience with this set of amazing guys. Fast forward 2020, where we are now, if you look at various third party reports, whether it is Safety, K, App Annie, and so on and so forth, they peg AppsFlyer India market share between 75 to 85% market share. It doesn't matter whether it's 75 or whether it's 85. I think by any stretch of imagination, in 4.5 years, it's a good market share to have. But what I want to highlight here, Kaushal, is that AppsFlyer in India, out of whatever market share you kind of look at, even if we were to take that with a grain of salt, the higher percentage of our existing customers is enterprise. Like of the market share that we have, I think close to 90% customers will be enterprise customers.
Wow, really good. And that's a really great growth story from the place where there was absolutely the CEO didn't had a number to mention when you asked the market share to a 50%, which was the target. And here you are almost at around 80-90% market share at the enterprise level. Really good.
Thank
That's
you.
nice. And Sanjay, since we are speaking more about the apps today, I would like to start with the core discussion and start with this question around the digital ecosystem. India has evolved a lot, and so has the digital ecosystem along with it. But how is the app story viewed around the digital ecosystem?
I think it's a great question. Many people ask me, how have apps evolved because of evolving digital system? I think you gave it a little bit of twist by how is digital ecosystem evolving because of apps. I think it's a great.
Yes.
See, fundamentally, there are four major components for a digital ecosystem in India or otherwise. And I think apps stay at the core of it. Four components for this digital ecosystem being user profile or users of internet, the digital service industry per se, the innovative startups, and the NEGP, which is the National E-Governance Program. Now, if you look at any of these parameters, let's look at users of internet or user profile. Today, India has about 500 million or upwards of 500 million internet users. Okay. If you look at the CAGR growth has been about 40% from last 12 to 14 years. But the major inflection point happened around 2012 and 13. And that was the time, of course, app existed before that, but that's when we got a huge push in the system of that. Storage consumption per user used to be, the overall storage consumption used to be in terabytes, which is today about 17,000 petabytes if you look at April to June 2019 quarter. So that's the huge amount of storage capacity that's been consumed by users today. Why essentially? Because most of these users are on various forms of apps. Let's look at the digital service industry. A huge efficiency has been driven by the digitization of offline to online services. One of the examples that comes to my mind offhand is the digital payment system. Like think of time when people had to stand in queue in the bank for money transfer, doing any banking transaction, stuff like that. Everything today is happening on a click of a button. If digital as a service industry is about 200 billion today, about 660 million of that is fintech. So that's the amount of contribution that fintech brings into the digital services. And there are many more such industries that have transformed offline to online, whether it is commerce or travel or so on and so forth. Again, app being at the core of this usage, right? The third one I said about was the innovative startups. Now, look at the tech startups that have happened in last 10 to 12 years. In 2010, there were a handful of tech startups, probably had raised about, I think, half a billion dollar, about $550 million, what they had raised in 2010. Today, we have about 9,000 or more tech startups, which raised fund of about $14.5 billion. And most of these tech startups are in the app domain. So, which means whether it is OTT, education, or entertainment, or finance, or travel, or utilities, everything is based around app. So app is at the core of each of these components that I said. I'm not talking about the National E-Governance Program right now, but that is also at Aadhaar or Arogya Setu app, which is happening during the COVID. So everything is based on app. So I think while we say that, okay, apps have evolved in the digital ecosystem or the growing digital story of India, I would say it's the usage of apps that also has helped to evolve the digital ecosystem per se.
True, very true. And that's something we are going to see a tsunami yet coming in terms of the app usage as the number of internet users and other metrics keep on increasing in India.
I think we have just scratched the surface when it comes to that. Look at like 500 million users is a good number, but
Mhm.
there's still so much more to go if you look at
Yeah,
population.
lots of headroom out there. And Sanjay, while we speak of the headroom, any information which you could share on the socio-economic indicators such as employment, education, etc.?
We're going to just zoom out a little bit, and in some cases we can kind of zoom in. So if you look at, in continuation to, for example, what I just said about 500 million, look at India as an economy, or India as a country that has evolved over last 15, 20 years. I think there's a growing segment of, what we used to call the lower middle class, and the higher middle class. And there's a huge shift. There's a huge shifting happening in that. People from lower middle class moving into the middle class, and so on and so forth. I think the dispensable income has increased. Okay. I think your question is predominantly, as you said, targeted towards app. The mobile
Mhm.
literacy has improved. Even if somebody is not, let's say, English literate, but he would still be able to, snack through the various apps that he might be using day to day times. So
Very
the
true.
mobile literacy has increased. I think the dispensable income, discretionary spends have increased, and the segment of people are moving. The affordability has increased. And what has happened on the other hand is the cost of smartphones have come down. The smartphone penetration has increased. I think earlier there was, from an app standpoint, we would see a lot of apps getting uninstalled because there was a less storage space available in the phones. Today, at a $100 $200 value, we have a smartphone which is good enough to cater to a good amount of apps. So there's a huge shift which has happened from which where we were 10, 12 years back today. And this is only, again, I believe is going to get better, because as we move forward, I think internet penetration is going to increase. The tier 2, tier 3 cities, or tier 3, tier 4 cities are going to get more internet enabled. The cost of smartphones can get further optimized. We will have more and more apps catering to those target segments, which will help those users to, do their livelihood or daily day-to-day jobs. I think this whole economic, social economic pattern is shifting towards that right direction. And I'm very bullish about the India growth story, or digital growth story in India as a
Mhm.
market.
Great. Sanjay, you mentioned about the socio-economic factors currently. Any changes which you see in terms of this numbers because of the COVID? Has it accelerated or reduced the growth rate in any manner?
Well, Kaushal, I think there'll be hardly anybody who would say that COVID has not affected them. In some cases, I for sure know some of my customers who say that in the hindsight, COVID has helped them, and I'll talk about that as we move forward. But it has definitely affected a large chunk of population, large group of people or segment in a wrong way or in a bad. I don't know whether necessarily it has changed the socio-economic fabric. But again, as I said, zoom in and zoom out. If we kind of zoom in into the COVID period, which essentially started Feb, March onwards, and it's continuing, I think the discretionary spending during this phase kind of reduced. And of course, the supply chain management also got down, right? Because we had manufacturing units hit, we had automobile hit, we had a lot of those industries hit. So I think the smartphone shipment in this time frame went as back as to 2017-18. I was reading one of the reports. So that has come down. People are spending necessarily on essentials. I was reading through this report on some of the search items that people are doing today. And it said that the biggest search during this time frame was on essentials only. Okay. So people searching for essentials only. So I think during this COVID phase, and I firmly believe, and this might be my personal opinion, this is a momentary phase. Of course, it hit us all globally, irrespective of caste, creed, or whatever. But what is going to happen in this COVID phase is not what is going to necessarily determine how the business will be done or how people are going to perform over next period of 2, 4, 6 years. I mean, this behavior
Okay.
may continue.
Mhm.
It has given us a lot of learning, and I think, for example, work from home. We never thought that we're going to work from home for such a long period of time. We never
True.
knew, and we never thought, or we never fathomed that it's going to be one so difficult, and then we can make peace with it. So we have learned a lot of things, and that will stay with us. But somebody saying that, oh, you know what, this socio-economic fabric, because COVID has changed us and everything is going to go down, I don't necessarily believe in it. And my thoughts are basis some data. While we saw a huge dip in the spending of e-commerce or app downloads from February, March onwards in most of the sectors, and there are some sectors which we saw growth also, we'll talk about that. But today, there is about 250% recovery in the e-commerce space, for example. There has been improvement in the utilities vertical. So it's not necessarily going to stay with us. Of course, it impacted us, but I don't believe it necessarily is going to stay like that for a very, very long time. I don't know whether I answer your question correctly. Yeah.
Yes, you did. And that helps us understand that what are the current change or the things which are going because of the COVID. But yeah, we would like to also understand from you that, let's say, in the coming 3-4 years, what are the other change that you see? Because we are at that current number of 500 million, and with a population of 1.3 billion people, there's quite a bit of headroom over there. But what do you think would be the future change if we had to move more closer to the, let's say, 90% mobile usage as compared to the population, which would be somewhere around, let's say, 1 billion or so number, which would be almost 100% increase from the current 500 million numbers. So if we had to grow to that particular number in the coming 3-4 years, what do you think would be the core change in front of us?
Yeah, so that's like a little bit of crystal ball gazing for me. But
definitely, that would be for everybody. But yeah, who better than you to answer that question?
But yeah, if I were to kind of look things in retrospective, step back, see how the emergence of trend has been, marry it one with, as I said, socioeconomic factors, two, and the growth. Fundamentally, look, today we are 500 million internet users and let's say about 300, 400 odd smartphone users. We are about close to be 1.4 billion population.
Yeah.
As I said, some of the things like affordability increasing. On the other hand, the cost of smartphones coming down, the usage per se increasing. Like smartphone today is not a fancy item to show off. There are people who are making their livelihood out of this device. In most part of country, let's say tier 3, tier 4, and the emerging India, which we call Bharat, the new Bharat, mobile is the first touch point for your internet. Like I know of my driver who exposed me honestly to a lot of new apps which I did not know at back then, was not exposed to desktop or laptop. Like a large chunk of population is not exposed to desktop or laptop. Their first brush to internet is through a smartphone device. So smartphones penetration is going to increase. There necessarily is a headroom. Like it's not that we have hit the roof. There is a huge headroom there. Affordability has increased. The cost of phone has gone down. So you see, everything is like kind of complementing each other. I think on top of that, as I said, the mobile literacy and usage has increased. So that makes it from a want to have to a need to have kind of a device is how it is going to be. For us to, kind of how can we further evolve from this is, can we have more and more apps catering to tier 3, tier 4 segment, which is helping them with their livelihood, helping them with their day-to-day routine tasks, and is making their life easier. I think that's what's going to further propel the growth, further propel the usage of apps and devices.
Okay. And Sanjay, when we speak of this, all these factors like affordability and others are going to accelerate the growth. Do you think there would be any other factors which would restrict this particular growth, or any risk which we should be aware of, or challenges which you're seeing?
From a growth of apps ecosystem, I think that's what you mean, right?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, so I think while the future looks bright, does not mean that we have to get complacent or app developers say, okay, there's all for us to grab. It's very important to make sure that these apps are super relevant in the marketplace. For example, fundamentally, it starts with what is the need that you're solving for, okay?
True.
And what my target segment would be. What's the scale on that? That's number one. Second, what is the kind of user interface, UI, UX, that how easy is my app across the various target segments to be used, and how good will be the adoption for that. Once that is done, then the third thing is India is such a diverse geography, different cultures, different languages, different customs, different, festivals, so on and so forth. Like I don't know whether it's right to say, but I think multiple countries within one country, right? So what works for you in Maharashtra may necessarily not work for you in, let's say, Assam. For you in UP might not work in Tamil Nadu and so on. So if, for example, you are, let's say, a news app, which everybody wants to consume, but the languages are different, are you making sure that you are catering to these varied language sects? Are you adopting vernacular? Are you using, what you call apps in different regions that will be adopted by various different discrete set of people? So I think usability and is also one of the key components. Now, let's say if you have everything in place, okay, let's presume things are kind of taken care of, and now a marketer or an app developer is looking to grow this further. There are
Mm-hmm.
inherent challenges in the growth side of this app. For example, one of the most common growth challenge the app developers are facing is from a fraud standpoint, which is, there are essentially two types of fraud, and we don't want to get into it. The one is there's a real user, but somebody is hijacking that install for you, and therefore you're paying for something you should not pay for. And then there is a fabricated or a machine made or a bot, whatever you want to call it, install.
Yeah, bot based intro.
So that's another deterrent to your growth, because it is not necessarily letting you grow to the level where you want to grow, because what you see as a growth is necessarily a fraud. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's the other challenge that we see inherently in growth. So I think fundamentally these are some of the things that if an app developer is taking into consideration, and luckily we have a solution for all of this, right? I think there is enough and more growth for in the ecosystem for the app developer.
True. And when you were saying to the solution, you were speaking more about the fraud related solution, which AppsFlyer would and other tools similar to that would be able to provide, right?
Well, yeah. So, firstly, I think you can definitely look at, as I said, the target segment and understand what target segment I'm going to cater to and what kind of an app fundamentally is going to work in that segment. And essentially, what's the UI that I should use for, so that it's an ease of use. We also addressed the varied geography that India has today. And I just give you one example, which is language based, and there can be so many more. Like, how can I make relevant across length and breadth of the country? Two, inherently, when we move to the tech side of things, if growth is limited by, let's say, fraud, how do I counter that with various anti-fraud tools that are available in the marketplace, one being from AppsFlyer?
Got it. Fine. And Sanjay, would there be any statistics available in terms of how is the apps distributed across sectors in India?
We predominantly have apps mostly across each vertical. A large focus at one point in time, if you remember, huge amount of money being invested into the e-commerce space at one point in time that led to the huge growth of commerce as a vertical, right? So shopping, whether it was the likes of Mintras and Flipkarts and so on and so forth. Then we saw a huge investment happening in the fintech space. This was around before and around the demonetization side. A huge space was evolved in the fintech space in terms of mobile wallets that led to the further growth and push around micro lending. People who are looking for loans and finances which are not catered by banks, or they do not have documents to kind of do that. So that's the other vertical that kind of scaled. Over the years, we have seen more utility-based, startups coming into place. The likes of your groceries and your shipments and your day-to-day courier services that are taken care of by these apps. So I think pretty evenly divided in terms of the sectorial growth. There might be, and in India, the classical thing is many people, when I talk to some of my counterparts from outside, say, hey, what is the best vertical in India? What's the growing vertical in India? Or sometimes investors are from outside, when I end up doing some friendly chat with them, what's the best vertical in India? There isn't per se, I would say, something that has consistently been there. Like we had a wave when e-commerce was doing well, and then we had a wave when fintech was doing very well. And then we had a wave with this whole geo effect, of data prices coming down. And we saw a huge boom, and that sustained for a pretty long period in the OTT space and entertainment space. The video consumption increased because the cost of data became so low. So that's how it is. We historically and traditionally have been a gaming shy country, I would say, to some extent. Of course, I won't say that the gaming does not exist. Of course, it existed, but nothing to the tune of what we say Western markets exposed to gaming as a market. But now we see gaming evolving as well. So that's how I see it. Yeah.
Okay. And over the next few years, do you think gaming would be one of the leading sectors in terms of growth, or OTT and e-commerce also may give it an equal competition in terms of growth rate? What do you think about it?
See, I think what COVID did was exposed us to things that we necessarily were shying away from or were not exposed to so much. For example, gaming and education. or
Mm-hmm.
entertainment, if I call it education and entertainment together, saw a huge growth. In fact, April, May, June 2020 during COVID, it saw the highest growth in the
Hmm.
education space, in the edtech space compared to the last 5 quarters, while
Okay.
most of the businesses were going down. Right? So it exposed us and it made us embrace this technology or this platform. While it did with OTT as well, but OTT we've been exposed for a long time. So I think these two things are now going to evolve because people have got used to it. The in-app purchases for gaming were one of the lowest in India, and now people have the psyche per se was such that I don't want to spend money on game. Like, why do I spend a certain amount of rupees on just crossing a level? I don't want to do that. I would play 20 times and earn some coins and then possibly cross the level versus paying, let's say, $1 to cross the level. So I think fundamentally we are slowly seeing shift on those lines. People have got exposed and choose to, as I say, edtech, and a lot of students are using that. By the way, on that thought, a metric that comes to my mind, in 2019, there were like 250 million KG to 12 students that had enrolled for. If I look at down funnel completely, about 25 million of them were edtech users, education tech users, and only 1 million was
Wow.
users, and which
Mm-hmm.
has already scaled to I think 5x this year. Okay, this
Wonderful.
is this is going to grow. Similarly with gaming. So I fundamentally, sorry, long answer, but I just wanted to set.
No, that helps. That's quite insightful. In fact, some of the audience who's looking out for creation of apps or building something new, they now know which sector to target. Gaming and
Yeah.
edutainment is the way to go.
These are the two things that for sure I know will grow. See, fundamentally, you can't go wrong with Bollywood and cricket in India. That's why we see apps that are directly related to it or
Mm-hmm.
indirectly catering that genre. So they are doing well as well. Look at Dream 11 or look at apps which are directly related to this, which is like Hotstar or anything surrounding that. They're all doing well. So fundamentally, we know in India, you're not going to go wrong with Bollywood and cricket for sure. But outside of that, what is growing, I can look at the data myself and say that these are the two booming verticals for sure for some time.
Nice. That's good. And Sanjay, the next question over there, while we see so many international apps being popularly used in India, we don't see many of the Indian apps which are created in India going global. Do you also see this kind of trend?
Well, definitely. And this is a great question and a question very close to my heart, Kaushal. I have myself been, in my interaction with the founders and the execs in most of my customer places or prospects when I talk to them. And I'm very keen to know like what is their strategy to go global, because it gives me enough pride as a fellow Indian to see that most of Indian apps are doing well at the global stage. Unfortunately, it's not been at that scale right now, but a couple of things that I understand, and I'm going to kind of try to put it a little bit in verbatim and then add my quote of understanding of this system.
Sure, that helps.
One, for any app to scale and grow, there is a huge amount of cash pile you need to burn. Okay. I don't think investors in India today are in that mode or in that DNA of high risk, high reward. They want to play little safe. And therefore, that huge amount of cash piles and letting people say, okay, go international, go burn it is not there. Point number one.
Mhm.
Point number two, India is an open economy, unlike any other closed economies. Like the Google of India is Google, right? So the Uber of India is Uber and Ola. The Amazon of India is Amazon. So our companies are necessarily directly challenged by international biggies, and they are countering and do that, and kind of working very hard to counter them. So that's point number two. Point number three, as I said earlier, India is such a diverse, vast, and big geography. There is so much more to cater and solve for in India itself before they kind of look outside, right? So they believe, and this is what I hear from some of the founders, is that if you get it right here with our model, then only you'll be able to get it right outside. And it's such a big market, such a vast market that it takes a lot to cater to. That being said, Kaushal, I think we've seen some of the OTT companies catering to international market, although that's necessarily been for Indian diaspora, but it will be, I think, only time when they cater to the foreign audience as well. There are companies, I believe, like I think Ola ventured into Australia. We also ventured into. So yes, we haven't seen many, but I have a strong hunch that it's
Soon
a
we'll be
matter
there.
of time. Yeah. It's only a matter of time. Not if, but when.
Great. Sanjay, a little backwards and go back to the days where if somebody wanted to start a digital business, they would start with the web first and then expand into the app.
Hmm.
Now we are seeing many things different, like you mentioned some of them already, where they are app first and then the person may consider if they would like to go and consider the web. Is this a good approach of going app first and then doing web? And if yes, why?
I think yes, necessarily from an Indian standpoint. As I said in the beginning, there is a huge segment which is still not exposed to the app ecosystem or to the digital ecosystem, which is just getting to terms to the digital ecosystem and reaching there. Okay. And in those cases, also, mobile is the first device that they have their experience on internet. So that's the device, that's their gateway to internet. Number one. Number two, for an app developer to have a good control on the user, like a retained experience of the user, it's far more there on app versus on a web, because the app is there in their device versus whenever the user kind of comes on the desktop and visits your website. Apart from technology, right, the technical advantages that we have, I think fundamentally, because through app you are going to one reach to the audience which has not been reached before, the audience that will necessarily come to you through app as a platform only. My suggestion would be that it's a good approach.
Great. And Sanjay, would there be any particular growth story of an app which has grown really well? While you would have witnessed several of those stories, could you share one or two of those stories with our audience?
There are a couple from LATAM, many from India. So there was this game built out of guys out of college in Buenos Aires, and this was a trivia app, and they kind of catered to audience. They divided it to various education subjects, science and arts and whatever, things like that. So that app became pretty popular in no time, and it was one of the highest revenue grossing app. But coming back to India, I think my last 5 years, I have seen, some of the companies which were then not making a huge impact and sounded do really, for example, food delivery. Imagine 5 years, 6 years back, food delivery was not so common, right? So, but I think it's one of the life-saving, I would say in most cases, app. That's what some of my who are bachelor colleagues tell me. It's one of the life-saving app for them. So I think that's something that stood out. In the education space, we have seen, and education always remains core and close to my heart because it is solving for that essential need. I think the two things that we kind of need to, that people fundamentally will not go wrong with if they're solving for, is education and health, because these are two things which India really, really needs a lot of help on. Any amount of innovation will not be, you will not say that, oh, this is enough and we don't need to do more. There's so much more that we have to do. So there have been many in the OTT space that we've seen that humongous amount of growth in last 3 to 4 years. There've been many. It's so difficult to pick one, but I would say vertical wise or sector wise,
there are several.
Like 7 years back, there wasn't. People were reluctant to kind of buy groceries there, fresh vegetables and stuff like that. But that's doing so well today. So yeah, a bunch of those, I would say.
Okay. I love the way you dodged my question, Sanjay, over there, but this is the way I also do it when a new prospect is asking me for questions around my client growth rate or something like that. So I appreciate that. Thanks a lot for that. But yeah, I have my answer that, okay, at least apps around food delivery, education, health, OTT are doing well in India. Thanks.
Thank you.
That's the way I would have done it. It's fine. Let's move to the next question over there, which I would like to ask based on our discussion. Any suggestions? You gave quite a few for the app developers over there, but any suggestions for the brands for creating successful apps? We learned a little about the target segment UI UX when you mentioned the challenges. Would those itself be the suggestions which you will give to the brand, or is there something else which you would like to share with the brands?
Well, in my opinion, however philosophical it might sound, it is actually if a brand is solving for the critical need of the customer or its user. And I would say it's important to know what you are solving, but more important would be around why, like what I am doing, my belief in why I am doing that. And if you have an answer for that, I think that will create your first connection to the user. So if you have that story right, like you believe in something, I know of some of my friends, they said, you know what, I want to start my startup, just with an exit in mind, that I want to raise fund and I want to exit. I don't necessarily believe that's a great way of doing business, and you're going to solve anything, because that's when you're thinking about yourself. If you start thinking about user at the core of your strategy, that's when you come up with a product that will be able to help that user, right? And if you get that right, I think things will fall in place. So it's very important to understand who my user is, what their problems are, what am I going to solve for, do I believe in it, and what's the best way to go to that. So that's, as I said, it might sound philosophical, but that's at the high level.
Start with the why always.
Start with the why. Yes, good. And necessarily, once they are into the business, I think it's very, very important to make sure, and I'm giving this example from an Indian context. Again, as I said, the users are so diverse. If you are catering to one small, depending on your growth path, I mean, you might want to do a litmus test, but the scale that you can operate on in India is humongous. Sounds like a pitch, by the way. I'm sorry, but there is so much scale that you can cater to, and if you are able to cater to different regions, different languages, different cultures, and still have your offering at the core, I think that will be a clear recipe for your success.
Thanks. Thanks, Sanjay, for sharing that. We learned a lot about the apps. Now we would love to learn a little more about yourself. So my next question would be in terms of who do you follow?
Good question. Well, I don't know. Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know. There hasn't been a single personality that I have followed all through my life. It depends on what stage and mindset and frame of mind I am in. And I would want to see somebody who has passed through that stage, has done things, has faced the same thing, and what did he do? I try to read about them and how they possibly kind of encountered that situation and what did they do to overcome that, or how did they tackle with that situation. There hasn't been one single follower. I know at one point in time I would read Steve Jobs a lot. During the COVID time, I read Simon Sinek a bit, a couple of books, and so on and so forth. To give me a little more rational reasoning, I read and hear Sadhguru sometimes. But yeah, it depends.
Sadhguru, that's my favorite too. And Sanjay, over the last few years, you have really grown well, right from that position where you were a manager handling few of the key accounts to this particular stage where you are handling the entire country for AppsFlyer. What makes you remain so growth focused?
I think whatever we have achieved is, and I believe 100% in it, is the amount of hard work that the team put in. We believed in one common goal, and we believed in making sure that we are all one ingredient that I always found while hiring people and looked for was, are we customer obsessed? And so therefore, it's fundamentally about people, and then our customers with whom we worked, and they challenge the status quo and help us stay nimble footed, growth focused. So I think fundamentally that's where this whole growth comes from. But necessarily, if for me to stay growth focused, is I love the feeling of when you hit a milestone, that gives me some different high. I can't explain it in words. So that's been on the back of my mind. But that's what kind of helps me stay focused.
So that enjoyment that you get when you're hitting a particular milestone which has been set, and milestone after milestone, achieving those things constantly is something which keeps you on the growth path.
That's right.
Sanjay, my other question out over there is a situation where, let's say, consider that if you could time travel at this particular moment, what suggestion would you give to yourself at the start of your career, or to your younger self? Would you have done anything different?
That's a great question. Okay, so I think, truth be told, when I started my career early on, I was a little clueless kind of a guy. So I had my own brush up with failures. There was a story that I kind of learned and then implemented. And this is the suggestion. It's a great learning. So I was once attending a talk by Harsha Bogle, who has come as a motivational speaker, and he gave an example. I don't know how much of cricket you follow, but he said, and this is like many, many years back, he said there was Michael Clark of Australia when he was a newcomer. He came in with a lot of promise and potential. At the same time, we had a batsman from Bangladesh, I think Mohammad Ashraful, not the one now, the before, who had come. Both were compared neck to neck with each other. But a few years later, Michael Clark went on to become the great sensation that we know. and captain of failure. Unfortunately, the other gentleman could not survive or scale through to that level. Essentially, the message he was giving is that it's always important, like, it doesn't matter what potential you have, it's always important to make sure that you are surrounded by a champion team. And for that meaning, necessarily in our parlance, what I would say is that if you are surrounded by a group of people who will coach and guide you to do well, that opens a few horizons for you and you kind of think through. That's what if I were to time travel, I would not look at failures, but to concentrate on people who are around me and try to learn from them a little more.
Great, that's wonderful. Sanjay, now we will move to the speeded round, and I would request you to keep the answers a little short. Any particular quote that you live by?
There are two, if I'm allowed.
Sure.
So I try to tell this to my people every time, and I try to remember it myself every time. Never take success to your head and never take failure to your heart. That's one. And the other one, which I think is more important, is I read it somewhere that I don't have the key to success, but I know the key to failure is pleasing everyone.
Okay, thanks. If not apps, what would you be doing?
I have a great fascination for teaching. When I say teaching, I love spending time with kids from underprivileged part of the society. I would spend time there more often other than the charities. Yeah.
Great, wonderful. Any daily habit that has been a game changer for you?
I think during COVID, I picked up gardening. I always wondered like how people do gardening, how do they know what to do, what to mix and things like that. I just picked it up and I believe it's been a great fun-filled, very heartening experience. And it's amazing to see how a plant, like life experience, is blooms into flowers and things like that. It's been amazing. It keeps me very positive.
Great. Define Sanjay Trisal in one word.
Resilient and indefatigable.
Great. And Sanjay, how can our audience stay connected with you?
I think the most common one is LinkedIn. That's where I am, and I try to be as responsive and on time as much as I can. That's the place where.
Sanjay, we learned a lot from you today, right? From being a lot about the apps, but over and above that, some personal key takeaways which I have is to always start with the why, being customer obsessed, and being surrounded with a champion team. So those are some of the learnings which I take away with me, and I'm going to remember that always when I remember about you. But any other parting thoughts which you would like to share with our audience?
I think what COVID has taught us is definitely to be resilient, and this is not going to stay as a pandemic. We will definitely come out of it. So look at the brighter side of things. That's what I would want to say. I mean, I'm not here to give any gyan, but staying positive, looking at things which are there in the horizon. We need to do few things which are not to our liking, but we still need to do it. The choice is ours. Do we kind of crib and sulk as we do that, or do we enjoy the process? I think if we enjoy doing, even if we have to do things that we do not enjoy doing, the trick is to fake it till you make it.
Great.
You might pretend you're enjoying till it becomes habit. As they say that your mindset becomes your action. Your action becomes your karma becomes your habit, and your habit becomes the character that you are. Very important to have a positive mindset and look at things holistically.
Definitely. And more importantly, in the current times where we know that the silver lining in this dark cloud is already around us now, a little more of positivity would change the entire situation around us. Thanks a lot for sharing that, Sanjay. And it was wonderful having you with us on this particular show. It was a great experience and we had great learning. Thanks a lot for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you so much, Kaushal, for inviting me over. It's been a great learning experience for me as well to share whatever I know with you. Really appreciate you taking out time and spending with me. Thank you so much.
Thanks. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Growth Genius. I hope you learned something today that would help you to grow. If you did, please share this episode with your friends and family. If you're listening to this on the Infidigit website, I would request you to use the podcast app on iPhone or download Google Podcast or Spotify on your Android phone. Subscribing to this podcast will ensure that you get the episodes regularly on your phone. The podcast icons near the audio streaming widget on the Infidigit website should help you to navigate to the show on your podcast app. Also, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the Growth Genius Show wherever you are listening to this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Now go out there and create growth